Anybody know what monopsony is? I mean, know what the word monopsony means, if you remember from the product monopsony model we did? Nehemiah, do you know what monopsony means? What does mono mean in monopsony?
Mono means one.
Mono means one, yeah. And then what does the Sony mean? Sony or Sunny? Monopoly means one seller. What do you think monopsony means? One, not one seller, one
buyer.
One buyer, right? So the example we're going to use today in this labor market is, yeah, I'm recording. Okay. The monopsony we're going to look at today is where you have a situation like a one factory town. A one factory town could be a mine in a rural West Virginia county. Hershey, Pennsylvania started off as a one factory town where the man named Hershey, last name Hershey, designed a city and a city around his factory. So they're actually quite common, but probably more common in rural areas. I mean, I don't think you would see one factory towns in large cities, right? Near the town where I graduated high school from, Lewiston, Idaho, about 80 miles south of Lewiston on Highway 95, US 95, there's a town called Grangeville. And I think you could probably consider it a one factory town because at one point in its history, for decades, it had a paper mill. And a paper mill is where you take wood and you turn it into paper. And so they had this paper mill. It kind of stunk up the valley, the Grangeville Valley. And it wasn't, in terms of smell, it wasn't a very pleasant place to drive through. And then they closed down the paper mill, and all the experts predicted that, Grangeville was going to die. Well, Grangeville's in a picturesque part of the United States. And when the paper mill closed, there was economic hardship for a while. But what happened is tourism kind of blossomed. And the town is actually prettier, more healthy environmental wise. People come there not to work in the paper mill, but they come there to enjoy the outdoors. So the town didn't die when the factory left. And then I remember watching something on 2020 or was it John Stossel? John Stossel used to be on a show called 2020. And John used to be a consumer advocate reporter. And then he became a libertarian. And he had a show, and I believe this was on the Stossel show. It could have been on 2020. It's been a while. But he went and interviewed people when Levi Jeans closed its factory in, I think, a small town in Tennessee. And again, everybody was predicting doom and gloom. And I think he went there a year later to interview the people after the factory shut down. And he basically concluded that life was better in this small town without the factory because the environment was cleaner. People who lost their jobs opened up like small businesses. So the town didn't die. It actually was thriving. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at the economics of a one factory town, a town that you might find in West Virginia, right? Or, I mean, we could make this the Hershey, Pennsylvania example, right? So I have the Desmos model open over here on the right. We got to set our labor demand curve. We got to set our labor supply curve, right? So I'm going to copy the numbers and the minus sign in the labor demand curve, and I'm going to paste it right here. And I'm going to do the same thing for the labor supply curve. Okay. And then you have the equilibrium, right? And it looks like the graph in mouth and math, right? They look alike, right? They look alike. Now, on this one that's not being shown, there's one that's not being shown here, right? What I want to do is I want to copy the numbers from the labor demand curve, or sorry, the labor supply curve. I want to copy the numbers from the labor supply curve and then paste them over this graph that's not being shown. And we'll come back to that later, right? And if you click on this dot or this button here in Desmos, you'll see that it is on top of the labor supply curve, right? You'll see it's on top of the labor supply curve. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that off for a moment, right? Okay, so why does the labor supply curve slope upward? Mia, why does the labor supply curve slope upward? Are you there, Mia? When wages are when we're thinking about the labor supply curve, we got to think about people being in a queue, right? We're thinking about being people in a line. And we can think of this first person hired by this one factory town. We can think of that person as being willing to do that job. In this case, nobody's been hired. But the first person that will consider the job is going to want at least $7.66 per hour, right? Below that, that person won't accept the job. Out here, we have the 311th worker, right? On the red line here, we have the 311th worker, and that particular worker won't do the job unless the pay is $20.10 an hour. Does everybody see that? That's the labor supply curve, right? It's a queue of people from the most desperate. Maybe this person down here, has 4 kids to feed, right? And doesn't have much education. So they're willing to do the job for very little. Whereas this person, maybe this person out here, the 311th person in the labor market, maybe that person is single, right? And has more education and is willing to do this job for $20.10, right? So that's the labor supply curve, right? Maybe this person has opportunity to teach high school, or this person has an opportunity and the skill set to run a barbershop, right? So that person doesn't need to take the job in the factory because that person is running a barbershop or teaching school. If the wage got high enough though, right, they'd be indifferent from leaving their barbershop business or teaching high school mathematics. They'd be indifferent between those options and working at the factory. Does everybody see that? That's the labor supply curve. The labor demand curve is the black one, right? The labor demand curve is the black one. That first worker hired, the company's willing to pay about $44.98 for the first worker hired. The 311th worker hired, they're only willing to pay $20.10. Now, why is that? Again, the labor demand curve is a queue, it's a line, it's a stack of applications. The most qualified applicant is the most valued, right? The most qualified applicant is the most valued. The firm is willing to pay that person around $45 an hour. The last person hired, right? The 311th person hired, firm's only willing to pay that person $20.10, right? And then these people down here aren't hired, perhaps because they went to bad high schools, they have poor training, or they have a lot of uncertainty with regard to their work history, or they have a bad credit report. They don't have very good down here, right? This 484th person is only valued at $6.26 per hour, right? This person's not very valued, right? Again, probably because poor work history, poor references, bad credit report, criminal record, not very good training in high school or college, maybe no college, maybe high school dropout. So that's why this worker is not hired, right? So this is a queue, right? From the least regarded application to the highest regarded application, right? Does everybody see that? That's the labor demand curve. Firms want to hire these people, right, at that wage right there, right? You want to hire those people at that wage. They're not going to hire these people unless the wage falls, right? If the wages are low, they'll hire these people. But if the wages are above $20.10, they're only going to want to hire these people, right? The labor supply curve is different, right? The labor supply curve is different. We have the most desperate to work to the most desperate to work, right? To the last person hired, to the least desperate to work. Maybe they have opportunities in their labor markets, right? So these people aren't hired. They're not hired because they won't accept the job at wages above the market wage, right? $20.10. These people aren't hired because they're not accepting the work, right? Any questions? I'm going to go ahead and turn that off again. So if you came in late, what we did is we copied our labor demand curve to here. We want to make line 1 look exactly like that. We made line 2 look exactly like that. And then line 3 currently is the same thing as line 2, right? Any questions on that? Hopefully this is really starting to make a lot of sense, because we talked about what the labor, what demand is and what supply is, right? In a realistic way, in a more realistic way than what the book presents, what most books present. Okay, so I give you the equilibrium employment level, right? 311. That's just the intersection of demand and supply, right? So if you did it right, if you plug these numbers in right, the intersection over here will give you your employment level that I give you here, and it'll give your market wage of $20.10. So I got my market wage at $20.10, and I got the equilibrium employment level of 311 workers. Again, that's this intersection here, right? Everybody got that? No issues with that so far? And then I give you the worker surplus, right? The worker surplus is $1,934. And the worker surplus is, let me change the Y here. So my equilibrium wage is $20.10, right? I'm going to change the Y to $20.10. Okay. Why did I do that? Because the worker surplus is this lower triangle down here captured by these dots. That's the worker surplus, this lower white triangle. Okay. The firm surplus is this upper white triangle. The employer surplus is this upper white triangle, right? By these 3 dots, defined by these 3 dots. This is the firm surplus. And notice the firm surplus exceeds the worker surplus down here, right? The worker surplus is smaller area. The gains to trade are greater for the firm, right? The gains to trade is greater for the firms. And that's why these numbers are different, right? Worker surplus is 1934, firm surplus is 3869. Now to get the total surplus, what do we do? What do we do to get the total surplus? Titus, what do we do to get the total surplus?
Add the firm surplus and the worker surplus.
Yeah, exactly, right? Just add those two, right? And I'm going to just copy them in, and I'm going to just replace those words with the plus symbol to make it easy, right? I just copied the whole thing in and replaced the words in between, right? I'm adding this number to that number, right? Whoa, man, I just lost it. So I'm gonna replace the words and the comma with a plus symbol. And so my total surplus is $5,803. Enter. Okay. Any questions on that? So I give you the demand curve, I give you the supply curve, and then just verify that you did it right by making sure that where they cross equals these values, right? Any questions on that?
Yeah. What is my Y supposed to be again?
Oh, I just put that in there. You can keep that at 0.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I just put that in there to help with the triangles.
Okay.
Yeah, to show you that we had a triangle from here, everything below this line essentially to this supply curve. That's worker surplus, right? That triangle. Yeah, you can leave the Y at 0. I was just using it for graphical purposes. And then everything in this upper white triangle is firm surplus. So firms gain more in trade, right? Both firms and employees win, but the firm's gain to trade exceeds the workers' gain to trade, which is modeled visually by this big upper triangle when you compare it to the smaller lower triangle, right? And then the two together is total surplus. At this point here, we say the market is efficient. This is the efficiency point, right? If a policy makes one person better off, it'll make at least one other person worse off, right? So we can say this point is Pareto optimal, right? You can't make one person in these exchanges better off with a subsidy or a tax or a price cap or price floor. You can't make the 311. You can't make one of the 311 better off without making at least one other person of the 311 worse off. And so that's why we say this point is efficient or Pareto optimal. Okay, we call this efficiency. We say markets are efficient, right? Any questions on that? All right, if firm M is the only employer in this labor market, it is referred to as a monopsony. Again, a monopsony is the only buyer. One, and this is the Greek word, or this is a Greek derivative. This is a derivative of the Greek word seller. Buyer. That's the Greek letter, or that's the word. That's a word that is derived from the Greek word buyer. So this is the one buyer, right? If it successfully estimates the reservation wages of the people in this labor market, right? Again, this is human behavior here, right? These are the people that live in the town that are willing to work at different wages. They're willing to work a full-time job at different wage rates, right? So the owner of the town perhaps can estimate the lowest wage each worker is willing to work at for them, 40 hours a week. Maybe that owner of that company can estimate that. And if it can, then it can use its market power to drive down wages. And mathematically, what we do is the total expense of employment, TC is total expense, subscript E means employment. So the total expense, the total cost of employment for the monopsony, this is the monopsony's wage bill. And the wage bill is just W times E. So this is the number of employees it hires. And this is the wage that it pays each one of these employees. So you can think of this as revenue, right? Price times quantity, right? So we got the wage. In labor, we call this a wage bill. This is how much their labor costs, right? And a firm kind of wants to lower their wage costs, right? They want to cut costs. So they want this to be kind of low, right? They want to maximize profits and minimize their losses. So they don't want this to be high, right? They definitely don't want this to be too high. They want to be sufficiently low. This is how much they spend on labor each hour, right? Now, because we're assuming that they're able to estimate the reservation wages of the people that live in this town, they can replace W, right? They can replace W with what W equals. This comes from regression analysis. We kind of did this in week 1, right? Where we used sheets to estimate labor supply curves, right? So I'm just going to replace W with what W equals here, right? 7.66 plus 0.04 E. That's where that comes from, right? And then I distribute the E, right? E times this part, we get 0.04 to the E squared, and then E times this part, we get 7.66 E. This is a parabola that opens upward. It gets wider and wider and wider as the graph gets taller and taller and taller. I'll show you what that looks like. I'll show you what that looks like in Desmos. Oop. Having a hard time getting this to work. Okay, see, it's a parabola. It's a parabola, right? Now, obviously, it can't have its cost down here, right? It obviously can't have its cost down here, but it's a parabola that opens upward. Okay, so that's what that graph looks like, right? Now, in higher level economics classes, we differentiate this to get the marginal cost, right? And when we differentiate this part, the E goes away. So the marginal cost of employment to the firm is 7.66. This part is 7.66 here, right? Plus, when you're differentiating this is beyond the scope of the course. We take the old coefficient, we multiply it by 2, right? And we get 0.08. Okay. Now, when I hit enter, you're going to see the graph change. See that? We have a new curve in here. This is the marginal cost of employment to the one buyer of labor in this one factory town, right? A one factory town is going to own probably the grocery store. It's going to own the convenience store. It's going to own the gas station, right? That's kind of what happened in Hershey, Pennsylvania. If you go to Du Bois, Idahoans call it Du Bois, but I think the French would call it Du Bois. If you go to Du Bois, Idaho, which is pretty close to the Idaho-Montana border, just south of the mountain range that separates Montana from Idaho. You'll go to the town is basically a one factory town, but the factory is a farm with about 50,000 acres. A third of the acres are in alfalfa. I think a third of the acres are in potatoes. And a third of the acres are in something else. My dad used to work up there. And the guy that owns that farm, I suspect owns the stores that his employees buy goods at. So you could think of Du Bois, Idaho as a one factory town, right? So the one factory town is usually the owner of the one factory town is usually a resident of that town. And that person is probably the richest person in town. That person owns the bank, that person owns the store, that person owns the gas station and hires the workers. And so if that person doesn't have, probably is the mayor of the city too, or owns the city council and the mayor, right? So if that's the situation, then that one factory town owner can use his government, his city government, to prevent competitors from opening up businesses next to his, right? So in one factory towns, you might notice that prices are generally higher than they would be in other towns, and wages might be lower, right? If that would be the case, if the owner of all the businesses and the factory, or in Du Bois's case, the massive farm, are all owned by one guy, right? So that's how you get the marginal cost of employment. It has the same intercept as the labor supply curve, but the slope is twice as steep. So we got to multiply the slope by 2, right? And it comes from this mathematics up here, right? Again, the mathematics aren't important here, right? We're just modeling it like an economist would. And when we enter the slope here, we get the red curve. So what we have to do now is go back to our original Desmos. And we got to click on that. And then we got to multiply the slope by 2. In my case, that becomes, it goes from 0.04 to 0.08. Okay. Was everybody able to do that? Line 3 is going to be identical to line 1. Oh, sorry. Line 3 is going to be identical to line 2, with the exception of the slope being twice as big. The red line is the marginal cost of employment. This line in row 2 is the labor supply curve. Okay. Now, entering the slope of the, okay, we already did that. Choosing an employment level such that demand equals the monopsonist marginal cost of employment helps the monopsonist maximize profit, right? So we're at this point here, right? So what does this one factory town owner do? If it was a market system, if it was a pure competition market system, there'd be 311 employees hired in this town, and the wage would be $20.10 per hour. But because the monopsonist has a monopsony in the labor market, it can restrict employment to 233.25, right? At that employment level, it is willing to pay $26.32, right? Because remember, the monopsonist is the black line here, the downward sloping black line. That's the monopsonist demand curve for labor, right? So it's willing to pay up to $26.32, right? If it hires just 233.25 employees, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace the X equals 0. I'm going to replace the 0 here with the employment level at this point, right? I'm going to get rid of this point. So at this point here, that's where monopsonist profits are maximized with respect to how many employees are hired, right? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna replace the X equals 0, the 0 and X equals 0. I'm gonna replace that with a 233.25. And notice that this goes through the point where the red line intersects the downward sloping demand curve, right? So the marginal cost of employment line intersects the monopsonous demand for labor at the same point, right? You know you did it right if these three curves meet at the same point. Is that the case for everybody out there on the line? Not online, but on the line. If you've seen the internship, that's a pretty funny line. Gary, it's online. That's what I said, on the line. Everybody got that? No questions? Good.
No, I didn't get that.
Oh, who was that?
Sabrina,
Sabrina? Okay.
that's,
All right, let me see your screen.
is that from the
Can you share your,
workers?
can you share your screen?
I'm on my phone,
Oh, okay. Then we
so
can't do that.
my screen is on my laptop.
Okay. So what is your labor demand curve? The
Okay,
top one.
so it is the 44.24 minus 0.
Minus 0.0.
Hello?
Yeah, I didn't hear that last part.
Okay.
Hang on. I'm gonna do your problem right here. Okay, so yours is 44.24
0.24
minus
minus 0.
Yep. What? 0. What? 0.0. You keep cutting
8.
out.
Sorry,
0.0,
8.
yeah, 0.08 E,
Yes.
right? Now, what is your
Yes.
labor supply curve? The one below it.
It's 10.28 plus 0.04.
Okay. And then your red curve should be the same
Mhm.
thing. So 3 should be the same thing as 2, except we're
Yeah.
going to multiply it by 2, right?
So 8. Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. And so your intersection, your competitive equilibrium that I give you at the beginning of the problem should be 283 employees getting paid each 2160, right?
Wait, that you cut off.
Yeah. So right here, right? So in your problem,
Yeah.
this should be 283, right?
Yeah.
And this should be 2160, right?
21. Yeah. 0.6.
Okay. Now down here, you're going to have 10.28 here and
Yeah.
0.08 here, right?
0.08. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, good. And then your monopsonist is not going to hire 283 employees. He's going to
Mhm.
hire 212.25.
Okay. So it was the workers. Okay.
This is the number of workers right here, right?
Yeah.
So you want to replace your 0 with 212.25,
0.25.
right?
Okay. Got it.
Okay, cool.
Yes. Thank you.
All right, I want to go back to my version of the problem. All right. So down here, choose an employment level such that demand equals the monopsonous marginal cost of employment, maximize monopsonous profit. This is the number of workers, right? See that? At the red and black line, the monopsonist is going to hire fewer workers. And I give you that value, right? So this number here in your problem should match this number here, right? Everybody? Those two numbers match. That's how you know you're doing it right. Now, when you when I mean substitute this into the demand equation, all you're doing is you're plugging this value right here, 233.25, into your demand equation, which means all you have to do is read this value right here. So firm M is willing to pay the marginal worker, right? This new marginal worker, We have a marginal worker here. The marginal worker here is willing to do the job for 2010. The new marginal worker is willing to do the job for 2632, right? So 2632, they're willing to pay that, right? They're willing to pay. Do they have to pay 2632? What do you think, Joe? Does this one firm, this one factory town, have to pay 2632? What do you think, Joe? Joe Kearney, you there? How about Joseph Giasante? Are you there? Kirby, does this
Yeah.
Kirby, does this one factory town have to pay what they're willing to pay?
No.
They're willing to pay it, right? But do they have to pay it?
Not-
No, they don't have to, right? Because there's no other game in town. I mean, if you're an employee and you know the firm is willing to pay 2632 for the marginal worker here, the 233 workers, if you know they're willing to pay that, can you go in there and say, I want you to pay 2632? What is the firm going to say? What is the owner of the company going to say? Sorry,
Yep.
I'm the only game in town.
23.
Yeah, they're not gonna pay 2632, right? They don't have to. Instead, what are they gonna do?
Offer lower.
Yeah, they're gonna say, sorry, I know 233 people who will work the job for $16.99. See that?
Yep.
Right down here, right? The last worker hired, sorry, I messed it up. The last worker hired, the lowest wage they're willing to accept, right, is $16.90. I think I mistakenly said 2632. But yeah, this last worker hired by the monopsonist is willing to do the job for $16.99. Okay, so that's what they're going to pay. They're not going to pay the 2632, which is what they're willing to pay, but they have market power. Who else is going to hire these people in this town, right? So they're only going to offer $16.99, right? They're only going to offer $16.99. So the lowest wage the marginal worker will accept equals $16.99 in my model, right? To maximize profit, firm M does what? Do they pay a higher cost per unit or do they pay the lower cost per unit? Did everybody get those two wages? Let me go ahead and hit enter here after I type this in. Whoops. Notice what happened to you. I draw the lines. It's kind of cool, right? I programmed it to draw these lines, right? So did everybody get green check marks here?
How you got the third line or
The third,
line?
are you talking about the number?
Yeah.
Well, this comes from the graph, right? These comes from the graph, right?
Mm-hmm.
So over here, I'm gonna get rid of my competitive equilibrium. So this intersection here, the firm, in my case, will only hire that many workers, right? That's the number that we plug into the labor demand curve, right? By the way, Kanan, is that you?
Yeah.
Okay, so you have a red line, this dashed line, and this black line all coming together at the same point, right?
Yeah.
This number here in line 4, Kanan, should be
Mhm.
equal to this number from your problem.
Oh, X. Okay.
Yeah. You see that?
I have 213.75.
Yeah, so if you have 213.75 here, you should have 213.75 here.
Yeah.
These two numbers match, right? Why is that? Because that's where the red line, the marginal cost of employment, crosses labor demand, right?
Yeah. I'm good now. Thank you.
Okay, good. All right, cool. And that gives you the wages, right? The firm's willing to pay, in my case, 2632, right? but can get away with only paying $16.99 in my case, because $16.99 is the wage that 233.25 worker will accept. That last worker will accept the job at $16.99, right? That's where I got those numbers. Now, if you're a profit maximizing firm, what are you gonna do? You're gonna pay the wage you're willing to pay, or are you gonna pay the wage you can get away with paying? You're gonna pay the wage that you're able to get away with, right? You're gonna pay the wage that attracts that last worker, the 233.25 worker, right? In my case, right? Everybody got it?
Sir.
Any questions
Yes.
before I move on?
No.
Okay. Going once, going twice.
Sold to the high.
Sold. Sold. All right, this results in a worker surplus of 1088. Now, what is the worker surplus here? The worker surplus, see the dashed lines right here? When you hit enter on this last number, on these last set of numbers, when you hit enter here, you get these dashed lines here, right? So the worker surplus is the triangle below this dashed line, right? This triangle here, from the black labor supply curve up to the dashed line. That's worker surplus. Now it fell, right? Worker surplus was this bigger lower white triangle at the competitive equilibrium, right? So that makes sense. The gains to trade for workers in a competitive market are greater than the gains to trade in a monopsonist market, because the firm has monopsony power in a one factory town, right? So worker surplus is smaller than it would have been had this been a competitive market, right? So that lower triangle here is the worker surplus. Now look at the firm surplus. The firm surplus is the dash line up, right? The dash line up. It's a trapezoid, right? A four-sided trapezoid with one pair of parallel lines. Y'all see that? It's a trapezoid. So the firm surplus is much greater than the worker surplus. Why? Again, it has market power, right? So you take the small worker surplus and you add it to the big firm surplus, right? So I'm going to copy these two numbers, put them in Desmos. Oh, I got to use Control V. Then I replace the words and the comma with a plus symbol. And I get a total surplus of 5,440. $5,440, right? Hit enter. Okay, so total surplus was bigger. If it was a competitive labor market, total surplus would be bigger, right? But the monopsony power that the one factory firm owner has lowers the efficiency. It's inefficient. We have an inefficient market, right? Surplus isn't maximized at the competitive equilibrium. Any questions on that? And we can see the loss and surplus here, right? The loss and surplus is this triangle. This white triangle here, right? That's the loss surplus. In a competitive market, we're here. In a monopsony market, we're down here, right? Everybody see that? Is that cool? Any questions on that?
I got a question.
Yeah, is that Kanan?
No, Jimmy.
Oh, Jimmy. Okay, Jimmy. Yeah, what's up, Jimmy?
So on the monopsy, it's mine is 1696, right?
Yeah, up here.
So my question is, dealing with today's economy, would that be dealing with, say, the migrants coming across?
I don't, yeah, I think what it is suppose there's a border wall separating two really small border towns. And on the American side of the border is a small town that grows I don't know, corn, right? And the guy that grows corn has 50,000 acres,
Okay,
and he owns, and he takes the corn and he cans it. He owns the cannery. He also
Oh,
converts
okay.
corn into ethanol, right? To mix
Right.
into gasoline. So he owns the ethanol plant, he owns the corn fields, and he owns the corn cannery where you get the canned corn,
Oh,
right?
nice.
And he owns the farm, right? On the Mexican side of the border, maybe that guy has a wheat farm, right? And he owns, well, not wheat, corn. He has cornfields too, right?
Right.
So he has corn. And he makes corn tortillas. So he owns the tortilla plant, the cornfields, the gas station, and the grocery store on his side of the border. If
Gotcha.
there's a border wall, both these towns are monopsonies in terms of labor,
Oh.
right? If you take down the border wall, what happens? Now the employees have choices.
Gotcha.
They can work in either city, right? And when the border wall comes down, now you have a competitive equilibrium, which is probably why Republicans are in favor of border walls, right?
Gotcha.
Because now they have pricing power on labor and they can push wages down. Right?
Makes sense now.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's a good question. Any other questions? All right. Suppose C city, C stands for competitive. We have C city, competitive city, and we have M city. M city is the one above, right? M city is where there's a monopsony. C city is where there is no monopsony, right? So C city is a competitive version. So C city would be right here, right? C city would be right here, and M city would be down here, right? They're identical, except for one has a monopsonist and one has many firms bidding for the workers' services. Whereas M city's labor market is monopsonistic, C city is competitive. M city's wage rate will then be what? Lower.
Okay.
Right. So I'm going to subtract 2010 right here, 2010.
From 1699.
Exactly. Right. 2010 minus 1699. Right. C city's wage is higher. M city's wage is lower. So I'm going to subtract the second numbers in these 2 points. So minus $3.11. Right. M city's wage rate will be $3.11 per hour lower than C city's. Right. M city's workforce will be what? M city's workforce, these are the first numbers in these 2 points, right? M city's workforce is 233.25. And it's going to be lower by how much than C cities? I'm going to take the first numbers of the points. So it's going to have fewer workers, right? It's going to have fewer workers. In my case, it's going to have 77.75 fewer workers. So you can think of this, going back to Jimmy's question, you can think of this as you got the Mexico City, small town, one factory town. You got the American side with a one factory town, and you got a border wall, right? With passports and immigration laws and a border wall, there's no exchange of labor, right? The workers on both sides of on either side of the river only have one choice in terms of employee. Republicans want walls, right? Why? Because it pushes the wage down, right? It also reduces the labor force. So the towns in these one factory towns tend to be underdeveloped. If you look at, I have a colleague from West Virginia. She dropped out of high school. She got married to a military guy, and then she got divorced, I think in her 20s, And when she was divorced, she went back to community college, and then she ended up getting her PhD in economics from George Mason University. And she talks about West Virginia economics all the time because she's from there. And what she says is West Virginia is underdeveloped. Why is West Virginia underdeveloped? Because West Virginia's economy for years, decades, was based on coal mines. And so a coal mine ends up being a one factory town. Workforces are smaller, wages are lower. When you multiply those two together,
See.
aggregate incomes are a lot lower than they are across the river in Columbus. Ohio, right? So she would always show us a map of West Virginia next to Ohio. And on the Ohio side at night, you saw more lights. In West Virginia side, you saw much less development and fewer lights at night. And it's because of the monopsony power that these coal mine owners have in these towns, right? Now, here's the rub, right? Here's the rub. If you're a firm and you see that wages are a lot lower in one of these one factory towns, what do you want to do maybe? If you're a firm, you want to try doing what? Maybe you want to open up a business, a factory in that one factory town, right? Because the wages are a lot lower. This kind of happens on a national level. This is why Apple makes their phones in China, or Nike makes their shoes. They used to make their shoes in Indonesia, but I think they make a lot of the shoes now in Indonesia or Vietnam because wages are lower, right? So this happens on a global scale. Firms relocate their factories where wages are lower, right? So this can only be present in the short run. If it's present in the long run, then what has to be the case? If these wage differentials are present over the long run, then what you're probably going to see if you did a little digging, you're probably going to see some anti-competitive laws where there's a border wall, or there's licensing, right? Or con laws where the incumbent firms can veto an entrepreneur trying to come into its labor market because the wages are low. You're probably going to see some anti-competitive regulations in places where wages are held low because there's a monopolistic firm in that labor market.
I have a question.
Yeah, Jimmy.
I didn't come out with I came out with 314 and under the workforce would be $77 where you have 7775.
Uh-huh.
And it says 311. Maybe I have it backwards again, like last time, Monday.
Yeah, so let me widen this up for you.
Let's see.
So the 311 should be the first, the smaller number should be
right?
first, right? Yeah, dollars. And the bigger number should be workers.
So where'd you get the $77 from though?
That's the difference between, you can actually get it from up here, right? So the competitive number of workers in the competitive market,
Mhm.
I have 311 workers here, right? See
Okay.
that? And then down here, I have how many workers? 233.25.
33. I was adding the wrong thing.
Yeah.
I have to subtract those.
Yeah, you have to subtract them. Yeah. But these numbers are given to you in the problem, right? Both these numbers. But you can also get them from the points here, right? You can get them from these points here. If you want to subtract 2010, well, whatever your second number is here.
Yeah, I did that. I
Minus
got
your-
314.
Okay. And then you subtract the first numbers, right? And you should have positive numbers,
Let's see.
positive values.
So I subtract. Oh man, where I go?
You want to share your screen so we make sure you get it right?
Let me see.
Can you share your screen, Jimmy?
That's what I'm trying to do now.
Let me make sure you can do it. All right. I authorized sharing screens, so you can share your screen if you like. You got to hit that green button at the bottom of Zoom. There's a green button in the center of the bottom of the Zoom window. There you go. Oh, you want to use the numbers below. You want to use the, yeah. Here, let me I'm gonna request remote control. Okay, so you want to use these numbers right here, right?
Okay. So the
Yeah, you wanna use
230,
these
oh,
numbers.
this is where the problem was. Okay.
Yeah. Let's do this. You want to subtract the 2010 and the 1696.
I got
right?
314.
Yeah, and then you want to subtract 314 and 235.5.
Oh, that's where
Yeah.
I lost it.
Yeah. And you can do that in decimals if you want.
So here. I was doing it backwards.
Yeah, you can do it right there if you want. Yeah.
So it's 235.
Yeah, 235.5 something.
Yep. Minus, what's this right here? It's 314.
Yeah, double check the green one or that gray one. Double check right here real quick
Green
before
one?
you move on. Yeah, double check there.
235.5.
Okay. And then 314. All right, good. So now you can do that right here, right? So it's 78.5. 78.5. Yeah, 78.5.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Anybody else have any questions? Let me exit out of Jimmy's full share. Okay, these two results suggest that relative to city C, M City will have M City has what? Its worker surplus is lower, right?
Yep, lower.
Yeah, its worker surplus is lower than C cities, right? So C city's up here, right? And M City is down here. So workers are going to be poorer generally in M City, right?
Correct.
They're going to have less, lower worker surplus, right? With regard to firm surplus,
Gonna be higher.
in M City, yeah, right, because they have market power, right? The monopsonist surplus is $4,352. But in a competitive market, it's lower, right? So the gains to trade accrue to the rich guy, right? The rich guy in the small one factory town. And M City will have lower total surplus. So in general, it's going to be poorer. The gains to trade are less in M City. That's why I'm an advocate for free markets. Markets, and Republicans are pro-business. Democrats generally are pro-labor. And pro-business, I used to be a Republican. I grew up in Idaho, and 80% of the town I was in was Republican. I think the state is 60% Republican and 40% Democrat. So I grew up as a Republican, but my parents were more libertarian. They voted for Republicans, but they were more libertarian. My dad was a mountain doctor. Anybody know what a mountain doctor is?
That's a good one.
Yeah, Granny from Beverly Hills Billies was a mountain doctor.
Shoot.
You have to watch the Beverly Hillbillies to get that one. Jimmy knows it. But my dad was a mountain doctor. If I got a tick in my calf, my dad would heat up a knife.
Yep.
And cut it out, right? And then he'd bandage it. If my brother Ryan or brother Tom, he got a plantar wart on his foot, my mom cut the wart off and then she put aspirin over the plantar wart. So my parents were mountain doctors, right? They pretty much kind of were left to themselves. They wanted to be left alone. They wanted to run their farm, try the best, work as hard as they could, and just be kind of left alone. If they needed something, they did it themselves. If they needed a house extension, they added on to the house. If they needed piping put down on their farm for irrigation, my dad did it himself. So we're pretty self-sufficient, independent. That's why I fix boilers and cars, brakes, overhaul transmissions and engines, because I just grew up being self-sufficient. But I grew up politically, I grew up as a pro-business Republican. And my thing was, well, if you're pro-business, that's pro-labor, because the business won't flee to Mexico or China or Indonesia, right? the business will stay. And if the business stays, it'll hire workers. And I make the argument, if you're pro-labor, that causes businesses to leave the state, like the car companies did in Michigan. They left the state, went to places like Tennessee, Texas, and South Carolina, where the rules were less in favor of the workers, right? Workers can be free to join the union or not, right? So I always considered pro-labor as anti-business. And if you don't have any businesses, there's nobody to hire the workers, right? So that's bad for workers. But as I got older and my economics matured, I became pro-free markets. And I always thought pro-business was pro-free markets. It's not. Pro-business policies benefit businesses. They block competitors with licensing laws, right? So businesses want free markets in terms of things that they purchase to make their products. Like they'll want free markets in terms of steel, in terms of labor, in terms of wheat, in terms of potatoes. They want free markets in terms of things that they process. They buy for processing to turn into products. But they generally want protection from competitors. So in my mind, as I've grown up and my economics have evolved, I'm not pro-labor, I'm not pro-business, I'm pro-free exchange of goods, services, and ideas, right? And that's anti-pro-business, that's anti-pro-labor, right? And I think trade is the tide that lifts all boats, and we're going to learn about that next week when we do Production Possibility Frontiers, which is kind of an introduction to macro. Next week's topic will be the first topic we talk about in macroeconomics in the fall. So I consider trade, free trade, trade that, why should government say to Idaho potato farmer, you can't exchange your potatoes with a Cuban cigar maker? I don't see any role in government blocking those exchanges, right? So trade, voluntary exchange, is the tide that lifts all boats. And we see this in the model here, right? Monopsony power of the one factory town means the wealth gap between the workers and the firm grows. That's only made possible if that monopsonist is protected from the competition, right? Those low wages might attract firms to that labor market because the wages are lower. So that monopsonist has to control the government to block those potential entrants into the labor market, right? All right, so the last one, the lower total surplus in M-City is
Dead weight.
the dead weight loss. Yeah, the dead weight loss. Okay, and then that should be 100%. Cool. Man, it's starting to get warm in New York now. When I used to do this in the morning, my radio show yesterday, I was on the radio from 8 to 9, and I had to take my jacket off about 5 minutes in because it got so warm in the morning. During the winter, I'd have to wear a jacket. Any questions on monopsony?
Question.
Yeah, Jimmy.
So when they went to the Gulf War, would this fall in there?
When they went to what?
When they went to the Gulf War to Iraq?
Gulf War. What was going on with the Gulf War? From my reading of it, my recollection of it, I wasn't in. I was in the Navy during the Gulf War, but I was stationed in Idaho training sailors to be mechanical operators on nuclear power plants on naval ships. So during the height of the Gulf War, I was in Idaho. But after I did my time there and my duty changed to the ship, I was in the Persian Gulf after the war was over, and we were enforcing UN sanctions on Iraq.
Right.
And from what I remember about Iraq, and then applying it, I would think about what I read about Iraq back then to when I was in my PhD program about 10 years later. I came to the conclusion, based on my readings and my economic theory, that Kuwait, because the OPEC is a cartel, right?
Correct.
And the cartel gets people to agree to reduce output so they can drive the price up. And you see that with crude oil now. Saudi Arabia, Russia, and Brazil, and OPEC nations. Hang on, guys. I'm in my class. Give me 5 minutes. Give me 5 minutes. So if you see that what's going on recently, OPEC, Saudi Arabia, led by Saudi Arabia, they're restricting crude oil production, and crude oil went from 65 to 86. So I think gas prices are going to go back up, right? And they're doing that because Russia needs the money to fight the Ukrainian war. And I think the Saudis, China, and Russia are kind of working together, right? So what was going on in Iraq and Kuwait is that Kuwait, I think Iraq, headed by Saddam Hussein, was accusing Kuwait of cheating on its cartel agreement.
Right.
And I think, yeah. So Kuwait was supposed to only produce, I don't know, X billion barrels of oil, but they were cheating on it because the price of crude oil was so high, there's an incentive to cheat, right? That's what we learned from game theory. And so that made Saddam upset. I also think Kuwait was horizontal drilling because Kuwait is the southern tip of Iraq. So I think the oil drilling rigs on the border of Iraq were not drilling straight down. They were drilling straight down, and then they were going north into Iraq. And so I think Iraq didn't like that. And they claimed that they made the same argument that Russia did about Crimea. Russia said Crimea has always been a part of Russia. It was handed over to Ukraine when the Soviet Union was together in the Cold War. And Russia gave up Crimea thinking that the Soviet Union would live longer than it did. And it was easier for Ukraine to govern it than Russia. Russia was a republic. Ukraine was a republic in the Soviet Union. And Crimea was, part of Russia for a while. And so they handed over to Ukraine to administratively administer it when all those nations were a part of the Soviet Union. It would be like Texas handing over the Panhandle to Oklahoma.
Gotcha.
Right. And then the United States falls apart, and then Texas wants the Panhandle back. Right. That's kind of what's going on there. But with Iraq and Kuwait, Saddam made the argument that Kuwait was cheating on a cartel agreement. And then it also claimed that Kuwait was once a part of Iraq. So it was trying to justify its invasion of Iraq. But it was over crude oil, right? It was over crude oil. Yeah. Right. Most things are over minerals. The war in Ukraine, in my opinion, is a war for Ukraine's minerals and its fertile farmland. That's all the fight over Ukraine is. No different than the war in Afghanistan and Iraq and whatnot, right? The Middle East wars, they're usually over oil. The Afghanistan war, in my opinion, is over uranium, cobalt, probably the lithium minerals, right? We don't want to destroy mountains in the United States, right? Going after cobalt and lithium in the United States, we have to knock down mountains to get to it. So we're going to do that over in Afghanistan, right?
Gotcha.
Where Americans don't live, right? That's my opinion. Right. So all these foreign wars, in my opinion, are about minerals, crude oil, or farmland.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any questions on the model?
I think Chris has one.
Class is officially over. So if you want to leave, be my guest. If you want to stay and work on some past problems, we can do that. Chris, what's your question? Chris?
Never mind. I figured it out. Thank you.
Oh, all right. I love that when you say that.
Of course.
Yeah. You're on an iPhone, right? And you're on your
Yeah,
laptop.
I'm on an iPhone.
That's where I'm getting the feedback. Anybody have any other questions?
I do have a question.
If you have feedback, turn off the mic on either your laptop or your phone. If you have feedback, you have your mic on. If you have if you talk and there's feedback, you have your mic on your laptop and on your phone if you're watching it on the phone. Yeah, who was that asked the question?
Nehemiah,
Oh, Nehemiah, yeah, what's up?
my question is about 9A.
9A, okay. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna turn off the video and then I'll post it on YouTube if you want, for people who weren't here, I'll share the YouTube video with people that weren't here. All right, I'm gonna shut down the video. And then Nehemiah, are you